Hello, this is Stefan Lavender coming to you from my bedroom, where I will be presenting about the muscles of the human eye. So, let's get to it. So, the human eye, this is some gross anatomy. The human eye is located on the superior side of the anterior side of the human body. On the skull, the human eye are in these optic orbitals, these hollows that are surrounded by many of the bones of the human skull, except the bones that are in the back. But the bones in the front, the frontal bone, the lacrimal bone that's kind of behind your nose, maxillary bone that makes up your upper jaw, and the zygomatic bones, and your orbital plates, which I believe are just cartilage. And here's some more gross anatomy, kind of a anterior lateral view of where the human eye is located on the face. So let's continue. So the function of the human eye is to see. And so how the human eye does that is by picking up light from cells that receive light and transmit it as an electrical impulse through neurons to the occipital lobe of your brain, where the primary visual cortex, located right here in the back of your brain, will pick it up. And so here's a little schematic. The light reflects off this tree, goes past the cornea where it's slightly bent, past the lens where it's further bent, and then is received on the rod cells and the cone cells of the retina, the rod cells being around the periphery and the cone cells being kind of around this macular area. And then, like I said, propagates through neurons to the brain, where it will probably bounce around a bunch. Here is a little functional anatomy of the eye, kind of the different parts of the eye and how the anatomy leads to the physiology. So, the cornea, the transparent part on the front of your eye that lets light go in through the pupil, which is made out of the circular ring of muscles and tissue known as the iris that dilates and contracts to expose your retina to either more or less light, and the light will go through the lens, which we'll get into later, is manipulated by these muscles over here to accommodate so you can see crisply either close or far. And then around here is the retina, where there are different types of specialized sensory cells that pick up light and then send the light as electrical impulses through the brain, and our brain perceives this information as visual information. Alright, so now about the topic of this talk, muscles of the eye. So in general, there are two different groups of eye muscles. There are extrinsic eye muscles, as you can see here, and there are intrinsic eye muscles, which are right here and here. These red things are intrinsic eye muscles. And so let's get into it. We're going to go into a little bit more specifics about the extrinsic and intrinsic eye muscles. Alright, so a little bit about the anatomy of the extrinsic eye muscles. So, as you can see here, they are attached to the outside of the eye. There are lateral, superior, inferior, oblique muscles, and they are all used to move the eyeball so you can look around your environment. Unlike animals like owls and spiders who cannot move their eyeballs, they have to move their whole body, we have these muscles that allow us to move our eyeballs so we can look without moving our body. As the name implies, the lateral muscles are used to contract and move the eyeball laterally. The superior and inferior muscles move the eyeball looking up and downwards, and the oblique muscles, which are right here, and use this pulley to pull the eyeball in kind of this direction, are used to move the eyeball in kind of off axis directions. Here's another superior view. You can see that there is this levator palpebrae superioris muscle that goes across the top of your eyeball, holds it up there. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit of the physiology behind these extrinsic eye muscles. So, the nerves that innervate these muscles are right here. So, here is the ocular motor nerve. This nerve, coming from the primary motor cortex, is the one that we voluntarily control the movement of our eyeball with. And this nerve innervates the medial rectus muscle, so the one in the middle, the inferior rectus muscle, the superior rectus muscle, and the levator palpebrae, and the inferior oblique muscle are all innervated by that one ocular motor nerve. So you hope you don't hurt that nerve, or you won't be able to move your eyeballs. Other nerves that innervate these extrinsic eyeball muscles are the tracheal nerve, which is right here. They kind of all run next to one another, little 3 nerves in a row. And the abducens nerve innervates the lateral rectus muscle on the outside of your eyeball. All right, so let's talk about the microbiology of these extrinsic eye muscles. So the microbiology and microanatomy, they are skeletal muscles. So that means they are striated. These skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated and come enclosed in these fascicles, or these sheaths, and they arrange them into these packages, which is very convenient for the body. And so here's a whole muscle, here's a muscle bundle, and here is a muscle fiber with the individual nucleuses. So that is one muscle cell. And function, how these muscles work, is by contracting, as you might assume, and the mechanism of contraction is with the help of these 2 proteins. The myosin thick filament and the actin thin filament pull on one another through a process called cross-bridge coupling, which uses the energy stored in the bonds of ATP to help create mechanical work that will pull with these myosin heads against the actin thin filaments to create movement. And that happening, as you can see, tons and tons of times in a whole muscle will contract the muscle, and you'll be able to move. And so these skeletal muscles of the extrinsic eye are voluntary. We control the movement of these muscles. All right, so we're going to move on to the next muscles of the eye, the intrinsic. So the intrinsic muscles of the eye, and here is a little bit of the anatomy of the intrinsic muscles of the eye. So there are kind of 2 groups of intrinsic muscles of the eye. There are ciliary muscles, which are right here, kind of around the border of the cornea and the sclera. And there are also the muscles of the iris that are used to dilate and contract the iris which will allow more or less light to go into the retina, respectively. So here is a little anatomy of the ciliary muscles, which suspend and control how the lens of the eye is shaped. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But here is a little closer view. So these are zonular fibers, which are embedded into the lens of the eye, and a bunch of these guys suspend the lens in the vitreous humor, I believe it's called, of the eye. And they, by contracting, change the shape of the lens to accommodate for either near vision or far vision. Alright, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So when the ciliary muscles contract, it will make the lens, I believe, more circular, and that will accommodate for close vision. And when they uncontract or relax, the ciliary, or the lens, kind of elongates, and that accommodates for far vision. And so that is a little bit of the physiology of the intrinsic muscles. Here's some more. So here is a kind of busy picture of the nerves innervating the ciliary muscles. I highlighted them. It's kind of hard to see through the camera, but these nerves in here are the ones that innervate the ciliary muscles to contract and accommodate for near or far vision. And so these muscles are a part of the autonomic nervous system because they are smooth muscles. Unlike the extrinsic muscles, the intrinsic muscles are smooth muscles. So we do not have control over the contraction of these muscles. When we look at something, our eyes focus on it automatically without the intention of us focusing on that particular object that we're looking at. And so a little bit of the microanatomy of these smooth muscles. They, unlike skeletal muscles, are shaped kind of in the spindle shape. The mechanism of action is very similar. They still use actin and myosin, which pull against one another. They're arranged slightly different, and not in they don't pull on actin in the same way. They pull on it in different ways. And these actin and myosin filaments are kind of spiraling the spindle shaped cell. So when they contract, the cell kind of twists in on itself and squishes down like you would see when you like squeeze the end of a worm. And so similarly, again, the mechanism uses the energy of ATP and the phosphate bonds in the ATP, but unlike in skeletal muscles, smooth muscle cells use a few different proteins to phosphorylate this ATP and move this phosphate group onto the myosin head. And so there's this calmodium protein, which still similarly to skeletal muscles uses calcium, which is stored either extracellularly or in the sarcoplasmic reticulum to activate the protein and initiate this this contraction of the actin and myosin filaments. And so the activated calmodium will activate a different protein, a kinase, which will phosphorylate this ATP and move the phosphate group on to the myosin head, which will activate the whole filament complex and create the contraction. A little more larger anatomy, tissue anatomy, is that these smooth muscle cells arrange themselves kind of in this layered fashion, and they instead of each being innervated by one single nerve, they use gap junctions to propagate the signal. And so when one cell maybe gets a signal, the signal will propagate through the gap junctions and kind of create a unison contraction to let in the calcium and activate this cross bridging going on over here. So, moving on one more time, we are going to talk about some possible homeostatic imbalances and the balances you hopefully have going on in your eyeballs in a day-to-day basis. So what I'm going to focus on is the muscles of the iris. The muscles that when you close your eyes and open them, and then your eyeballs accommodate for the light, and when you open them, your irises contract to stop as much light getting in because your eyes are used to being dark when your eyes are closed. And so that is operated by the autonomic nervous system. So the sympathetic nerves are used to dilate your pupils, that is, open them up, and the parasympathetic nerves are used to contract your pupils, and that is to close them. And so my prediction is if these sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves kind of are faulty and there isn't this homeostatic imbalance, your eyes will not accommodate to changing in light. And so if you were to walk into a bright room, your eyes might not accommodate for it and constrict via the parasympathetic nerves leading to these muscles, and you will have too much light coming into your eyes and it will kind of partially blind you. Same with if you were to walk into a dark room and your eyes won't dilate, you wouldn't be able to see anything because you don't have as much light hitting the periphery of your retina. Okay, so that is a homeostatic imbalance. Here's my slide. Next one, we are going to talk about one disease, which is a nervous systems disease called Horner's syndrome. And this syndrome is caused by a damage or lesion somewhere along the pathway the sympathetic fibers traveling to the head. And so the sympathetic fibers traveling to the head are the cranial nerves, and they are some nerves that innervate the eyes. So this will affect your eye. One way it affects your eye is something called meiosis. Not to be confused with cellular division meiosis. This meiosis is pupillary constriction is affected on the side caused by the paralysis of the pupillary dialary smooth muscles in the iris. And so this is really similar to what we were just talking about in the homeostatic imbalance. If you have this disease and a lesion somewhere along the pathway of the sympathetic nerve fiber, your irises won't be able to sympathetic, they won't be able to dilate. And so when you are in a stressful situation and you need maximal vision, your eyes won't dilate. Similarly, if you walk into a dark room or turn off the light in the middle of the night, your eyes won't adjust and you won't get enough light in your retinas to be able to pick up anything. There are other symptoms of this, such as a droopy eyelid, known as ptosis, again caused by the nerves innervating this eyelid going faulty, anhidrosis, loss of sweating on the affected side, because these sweat glands apparently are innervated. Flesh skin, vasodilation of the subcutaneous arteries on the affected side caused by a lack of sympathetic vasoconstriction. Yeah, so your skin will be vasodilated, and the sympathetic nerves that constrict your capillaries won't constrict, and you will have very red skin. So yeah, neurological diseases don't sound very fun. That is Horner syndrome, and that is the end of my presentation. Here are my references, the resources I used. I used 3 different Frank Netter anatomy books. Very nice illustrations by Frank Netter. He's amazing. Recommend him. And a Human and Physiology textbook by Elaine Marie B. And I want to say thank you. Bye.